So here we are at the beginning of a study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Maybe you've read it, maybe you haven't. If you have, you're probably wondering why I chose to do a series on it. It's a confusing, depressing, ancient Hebrew wisdom poem that sometimes doesn't even sound like it belongs in the Bible. I've chosen it because, believe it or not, it's just as relevant to us today as it was written when it was written 3,000 years ago. And I actually believe it's more relatable as those of us in Ontario have been through a 6-week lockdown. Have you ever been stuck in the same place, doing the same thing, day after day, finding less and less meaning in the menial routines of your day with no hope of ever getting out of this endless cycle? Do you find yourself pursuing pleasures that once gave you so much joy and finding them increasingly less exciting and even gradually becoming dull? Then do you find yourself trying to chase some sort of newer and more novel form of excitement to remedy the problem just to find the whole thing happen again? If any of this resonates with you, then Ecclesiastes is relevant to you, and it will also point to the answer to this dilemma. There's a movie from 1993 that's been making a resurgence in Canada lately because of this seemingly endless second lockdown we have in Ontario. And the movie's called Groundhog Day. The main character is Bill Murray, who is a cynical, self-centered reporter who suddenly gets stuck in an endless loop of the same day over and over. A couple days into the cycle, he's sitting at a bar with two strangers and asks them, "What would you do if you were stuck in one place and every day was exactly the same and nothing you did mattered?" His initial response to this was that he threw caution to the wind and indulged in every form of excitement and pleasure. But eventually this got old and he started getting depressed and falling into depression. He even escalated to committing suicide again and again because it didn't work. Not even this got him out of the cycle. So he finally tried a new approach and he started to reinvent himself. Maybe this resembles your lockdown journey a bit. I'll try not to spoil the end of the movie too badly, but let's just say that he breaks out of the cycle when he finds a deeper sense of happiness. We can relate to this movie, aside from the smoking indoors and the shocking lack of masks, social distancing, and cell phones. But we can relate to the movie, and it resonates with us more than ever before as we struggle with the feeling of being stuck in the same day played over and over without any sign of escape. It gives us hope to see someone in this endless cycle who masters it and even breaks out of it. But does he really? Or did he just make some significant improvements and the credits started rolling with a happily ever after before he made it to the end of that illusion of happiness? My hope with this study is to point you to the real and lasting antidote to the lack of meaning and satisfaction that we find in life, which does not deny the miseries of life, but instead infuses purpose and satisfaction in them. I promise to be real with you, as Ecclesiastes does, and not just give the cliche answers that are too often given. These are problems all of us are facing, from the greatest sinner to the greatest saint. And it's time that we were honest about these things. So, coming to Ecclesiastes, I'm going to break it down into 4 different parts. So, Ecclesiastes 1 to 11, I'm going to title, Nothing Really Changes. Ecclesiastes 1, 12 to 2, verse 11, Nothing Satisfies. Ecclesiastes 2, 12 to 23, We're Just Going to Die Anyway. I know, aren't those cheery headings? Then finally, Ecclesiastes 2, 24 to 26. But I'm going to title it so I don't give anything away, just simply hope. So let's read that first part. Ecclesiastes chapter 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuit the wind returns. All streams run into the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, "See, this is new"? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. Let's start with who wrote this book. There's some debate over this, but the most common answer, and the one I believe is correct, is that it was written by King Solomon, the king in Jerusalem after David, the son of David, the wisest man who ever lived and one of the wealthiest. Now, next, what's all this talk of vanity? Vanity is the best word to describe a word in the Hebrew that there's really no good translation for. But since it's such a central word, we'll take a little bit of time to learn the Hebrew word, which is Hevel. When we come to the word vanity, the way it's translated, we often think of someone who's shallow and materialistic, and that's not really the emphasis of the word Hevel. What it's actually describing is something that is empty, short-lived, and unsatisfying. If we look ahead to verse 14, it says, all is vanity, Hevel, and striving after wind. The idea that this phrase gives is also giving the idea of the word Hevel, this idea of trying to grab the wind. For a more modern analogy, which I believe Solomon would have used if it was available to him, picture this. You have a child blowing bubbles. They dip the little hoop in soapy solution and blow bubbles that float around in the air with a rainbow-colored film. And then the child runs around trying to chase them and grab them, but they pop as soon as the child touches them. Now, this is a fun activity for a child, but it takes on a more depressing look when you relate those bubbles to being your hopes and dreams. So, the things that are supposed to give your life satisfaction, meaning, and happiness. Every goal that you pursue until it's achieved, you hope will make you happy. Sometimes it briefly does, but it never lasts. It never lives up to the hype. The bubbles burst. So we chase another one. Solomon starts this book as every good sage should. He looks at the patterns in nature, and then he relates them to our life. He sees the sun rising and setting endlessly in this cycle, and then he sees the winds blowing north and south, around and around in an endless cycle as well. And then there's the waters in the stream flowing into the sea, and yet the sea's never full and the lake's never empty. So he perceives that the waters must somehow be making a cycle as well, which we know more about today. So we see all these cycles round and around endlessly. And he relates this to our eyes and our ears, which constantly take in through seeing things and hearing things, and yet they are never satisfied. He says that when he says that there's nothing new under the sun, he's not saying that there's no innovation or invention. He's saying that while we busily pursue progress, fundamentally, things never really change. We just dress them up better with all our inventions. The more things change, the more really they stay the same. And that all this technology just gives us the illusion of accomplishing something meaningful. Let's come to our next section. Nothing satisfies. So read with me starting in chapter 1, verse 12. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. And I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it's mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of men to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works. I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of men. I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil. And this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity, and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So here, Solomon begins this experiment, which he is uniquely equipped to do. He's going to try out everything that is worth doing. It's like he's at the all-you-can-eat buffet of life, and he's going to try every food so he can tell us which ones are the best ones, which ones are worth eating. Solomon was able to do this because he was the wisest man who ever lived, and he was fabulously wealthy. For those who don't know the story, God appeared to Solomon in a dream at the beginning of his reign and told him he could have whatever he wanted. And Solomon said, I simply want enough wisdom to rule your people. And because he wasn't selfish and asked for something like a long life or riches or success or popularity, God made him the wisest man to ever live and then gave him all those other things as well. So Solomon was the guy who had it all, and there was nothing he couldn't have, so he tried it all. We see the beginning of this pursuit at the end of chapter 1. Solomon starts with simply becoming very smart and wise, yet he doesn't find it satisfying. In fact, in some ways, he was too smart for his own good. We pursue things that are appealing with the impression that they will make us happy, that they are worth pursuing. Solomon was able to actually get all those things that we desire and often can't get, but then he was able to see through the temporary pleasure of them. He was able to think deeply about life, and in a way it worked against him. This is where we get our expression, ignorance is bliss. So we're blissfully ignorant, but Solomon is not. In becoming so wise, Solomon forfeited this blissful ignorance and declared, in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. There's an ancient Greek philosopher named Socrates who famously said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, hundreds of years earlier, Solomon, another great philosopher, examined life and found that even the examined life is not worth living. Well, you still have hope of achieving happiness through pursuing your goals. Well, there's hope. How depressing would it be to be able to look ahead and see the end of the tunnel and realize that there's no light there? Just like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, Solomon's response to the endless cycling of meaningless days is to lose himself in fun and pleasure. And then after that gets old, he lapses into depression. He tried partying, and no doubt on a scale that would boggle our minds. There's a passage in 1 Kings 4 that talks about the daily provision of food for Solomon's household, and it's insane. It's enough food to feed over 10,000 people. That's how many people Solomon had on his payroll. I can't even imagine what a party would mean for Solomon, but I can be sure that it's right up there with the kinds of parties that the richest in our world would have today. Yet, it didn't satisfy. It was Hevel. So Solomon started grand building projects and gardening projects, and Solomon had a palace mansion that took 13 years for an army of slaves to build. He had massive flocks. He bought thousands of slaves. His harem reached 1,000 women. He had entertainers for his feasts, and he easily acquired enough silver and gold to fill swimming pools worth. Solomon was literally the man who had it all, and yet he wasn't satisfied. I know it's in our nature to just get jealous and say something like, well, if you don't want it, I'll take it. But in doing so, we would be revealing our ignorance. First of all, what often keeps us going is the belief that there is something worth pursuing that will satisfy us. Solomon made it to the top of the mountain, and he's telling us there's nothing there. It's kind of like this story of Alexander the Great, who was said to have wept because he ran out of places to conquer. That attitude reveals the ignorance that Solomon is trying to point out. He's saying, don't waste your life pursuing what I have. It's not worth it. Additionally, we lose sight of how much we really do have. We have so much that Solomon could have never dreamed of, and so much that our world can never hope to have. Most of the world throughout history didn't even have the luxury of pursuing pleasure. They were too busy finding enough food, water, shelter, and warmth just to stay alive. And many times they couldn't even find that. Where we live, it's unthinkable for someone to die of starvation. Our problem is losing weight and not eating too much food. Our problems might include whether our car will start, whether our internet is fast enough, and whether we will have enough money for a comfortable retirement, whether there's a worthwhile show on Netflix to watch, or finding enough room for all the clothes and purchases that we made on Amazon during the lockdown. All these things we rightfully refer to as first world problems. If we look in the mirror, we realize that we are Solomon. We could write a very similar lament to Ecclesiastes. It would go something like this. I gave myself to the endless scrolling of memes. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity and vexation. I binged on many a Netflix show, and behold, it was empty. I went from one YouTube clip to the next and found that was empty. I tried Uber Eats, DoorDash, and Skip the Dishes, and yet they did not satisfy. I ordered package after package on Amazon, and yet the pleasure quickly went away. I went online and put together the most impressive Instagram account. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I expended in doing it, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. We have so much and yet so little satisfaction. What Solomon is trying to impress on us is that what we are pursuing will not satisfy. We are trying to quench our thirst with salt. If you won't listen to what Solomon is saying, let's try to find something a little bit more recent with a similar message. Here's the lyrics from a song in the 60s. I can't get no satisfaction. I can't get no satisfaction. Because I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no. I can't get no. When I'm driving in my car and the man comes on the radio, he's telling me more and more about some useless information, supposed to fire my imagination. When I'm watching my TV and a man comes on and tells me how white my shirts can be, but he can't be a man because he don't smoke the same cigarettes as me. I can't get no. Oh, no, no, no. Hey, hey, hey. That's what I say. I can't get no. I can't get no. I can't get no satisfaction. No satisfaction. Clearly times have changed and communication is a little less eloquent. Maybe the odd rebel among you recognizes the lyrics of the Rolling Stones song, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. It may seem strange to compare a rock band to Solomon, but it's not as far-fetched as it may seem. They had everything their generation sought, and they came back and told them through their music, I can't get no satisfaction. Their equivalent of vanity of vanities, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. So that all said, let's come to the next section of what Solomon is saying. Chapter 2, starting in verse 12. So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there was more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will also happen to me as well. Why then have I been so very wise? And I said in my heart that this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated my life, because of what was done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who comes after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This also is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. In the first part, verses 12 to 17, Solomon tells us that he carried out an examination of not just wisdom, but foolishness too. You'd expect the wisest man alive to tell us how much better it is to be wise, but he doesn't. He tells us that wise or foolish, we both wind up dead. What happens to the fool will happen to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? When we deal with the idea of wisdom here, we should realize it's a little bit different than what we think of to an ancient Jewish person. Wisdom was more in line with our idea of excellence. So if you were really good at some sort of skill or craft, then that would be a form of wisdom to them. So what he's saying is, why did I try so hard to do everything perfect when I'm just going to end up 6 feet under right next to the fool? Yet he does have some positive things to say about wisdom. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. So he's saying that a wise person can avoid the unnecessary miseries in life. A wise person is at least going through life with the lights on. Whereas a fool, it's like he's trying to navigate the living room with the lights off, and he's going to do things like trip over the coffee table and step on a Lego. A wise person will at least keep an eye on the speedometer. He'll get regular oil changes and keep his tank full of gas. And even though their destination is the same place, at least he'll have a smoother ride. Yet, what he has to painfully acknowledge as the wisest man alive is that there isn't as much benefit to being wise as he would have hoped. Death is the great equalizer. Then he gives us one more cheery thought. Whatever you accomplish in life will be left behind. If you invest your time in preparing for the future, you might have a house that's paid off, money in your RRSPs for retirement. You can finally drive that car you always wanted. You can go on vacation regularly and not have to stress about money. But sooner or later, you'll be gone. And you'll have to leave it to your children who didn't work for it and therefore won't appreciate it as much. They may even waste it. How many successful businesses have gone belly up because the original entrepreneur's children were incompetent? And Jesus, later in Luke, gives us the same warning. Luke 12, he tells a story of a successful rich man who stores up all his wealth for an early retirement only to die before he can enjoy it. Then Jesus says, "This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for himself but is not rich toward God." Regardless of what happens to everything you work so hard for your whole life, you'll have to leave it behind. Maybe you're remembered, maybe you aren't. Most of the time you aren't, but even if you are, it's a poor comfort because you can't enjoy it. It seems a concerning pattern among artists that they are never appreciated until they're almost dead or dead. Sure, we remember artists like Vincent van Gogh, but he doesn't know, nor can he appreciate it. He's dead. The commentator Dwayne Garrett puts it this way: the vast majority of people never achieve lasting fame, while those who do gain nothing by it. Who would you rather be? Alexander the Great, who conquered the entire known world by the age of 30, but was dead a couple years later? Or the unknown farmer who lived 80 years with his family? Maybe one is preferred over the other, but both are long dead. A future all of us must someday face. Clearly, this isn't a pleasant topic, but ignoring it doesn't make it go away. Finally, we come to the first positive thing that Solomon has to say. It's almost like reading this book is like swimming under the ice, but there's breathing holes cut sporadically throughout, breathing holes of hope. And for the first time, we come to one of those. So after all this doom and gloom and depression, let's find something positive that Solomon has to say. Verse 24. There's nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God, for apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? It sounds like almost like Solomon is telling us to do everything that he just said wouldn't satisfy. It seems like he's recommending we find enjoyment in the toil that he just called grievous and vanity. Maybe we can figure it out with a closer inspection. In the next verse, he is simply telling, in the first verse, he's saying, eat, drink, be merry. That's a good summative expression. Then we see the key in the next sentence. This is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? Without God, we cannot even eat or engage in any of these pleasures, much less enjoy them. Do you see what's going on here? The problem with this whole pursuit is that it excludes God from the process. We are trying to find meaning, satisfaction, and happiness in this world without acknowledging or seeking its maker. We are looking in creation for what can only be given by the Creator. We are trying to invent new ways to do it. It's like we keep making all these fancy electronic appliances and try to make them work without electricity. The world around us was never meant to satisfy us, and no matter how hard we try, it never will. It was meant to reflect its Creator and point our hearts toward Him, and in doing this, we can find satisfaction. This is a reason we find so much significance in watching a sunset or gazing at the stars or taking in the view from a mountaintop. It's because we can see the handiwork of the great artist, of whom all other artists and art are a reflection. There is a reason we gain so much enjoyment from a good story, whether it's a book or a movie or a show, it's because it's a reflection of the grand narrative of which our lives are a part. And it could be a better narrative for us if we could team up with its author. The movies so often tell us that we need to find love in a significant other, and then we can be truly happy. But even this will fall short because it's also a reflection of a greater reality and a greater romance. It's a copy. God made this world and placed humanity in it and over it to steward his great work. But we mess things up really bad. The disobedience of Adam and Eve broke the covenant of love that God made with them. It severed the relationship and messed up everything that we are responsible for, this planet around us. Just like the flaws of a parent so often carry over to the child, this brokenness has carried over into every generation since. This is why Paul says in Romans 8:20, "For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it." This world is not the way it's supposed to be. Bad things happen. Life is really hard. People hurt us. People die. And we just can't find any sustainable happiness. But all this points to our broken relationship with God. I said that this is the great romance of which all other romances are a reflection, because it didn't end there. Our disobedience required a just punishment, so God's own Son, Jesus, stepped in to take it on our behalf. Through committing ourselves to him, this relationship is reconciled and healing can begin. The reason why we can't get no satisfaction is because we're doing it alone, separate from the one for whom we were created. The computer won't turn on because it's not plugged in. God is not cruelly depriving us of pleasure. It's a byproduct of our own choice to ignore him, and a byproduct of our decision, the decision of our original parents, Adam and Eve. The reason why romance is so often considered the closest we can get to happiness is because it reflects the true answer. The romance of God and his people. We need that relationship with him for our life to have lasting and satisfying purpose. We can't quench our thirst with an empty cup, which is what we've been trying to do. We need to bring it to the living water to be filled. We are coming to the end of this lockdown. It seems the groundhog didn't see a shadow last week, and it's going to come to an end. But it won't end our quest for contentment. It will only give us more empty opportunities with which to distract ourselves from taking the antidote. If we want to truly break out of the endless loop, we need to find the one who truly completes us, God. This won't immediately make everything perfect. Those of us who do have a reconciled relationship with God keep falling back into these same sorts of patterns and empty pursuits. But now we are capable of acting on Solomon's advice to find true and lasting enjoyment in this world's work and rewards. And these things are all now in the context of waiting for our true love to return and finally fix this broken world. Let's just close in a word of prayer. Father, I just thank you for the chance to study your word here. And Lord, I just pray that you would help our minds to take it in. It is a strange book being written so long ago and having strange ways of saying things. But we thank you that it is possible to understand it and that you help us. And it's also just not a fun book to read because it's so depressing. But too often, this world around us is the same, and we don't help ourselves by shielding ourselves from this reality. So Lord, I just pray that you would help us to find this antidote and to live it out, because too often we keep pursuing these empty things. So, Father, I just thank you that your Son did pay the price that we deserve to, and that because of that, everything will, in your time, be made right. I just pray this all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Thank you for him. Amen.